How's it going, everybody? My name's Dave Whipple and you're watching Bush Radical. During this last summer, the summer of 2017, I started work on my 4th log cabin project, and I hope you guys have had a chance to take a look at that series, Building the Alaska Log Cabin. In this video, I'd like to take you guys all back in time 17 years to 2001 and show you my first cabin build. Stay with me. So this is the very first cabin that I ever built. Brooke and I lived in this cabin for 2.5 years. It's pretty cool looking here, but it didn't look like that from the start. This is the property as we bought it, just north of Fairbanks, probably 10 or 15 minutes. You could see that somebody else had tried to homestead this piece at one point. It's got some fencing around it. I don't know whether they had goats or horses or anything, but it's a nice little piece tucked into a little valley. The pipeline runs through that valley. You'll see that here in a minute. But with this fence along the front and kind of a gentle slope, you know, the place had potential. I think we spent $6,800 on this 2-acre piece, and we ended up buying 2 acres on either side of us. We ended up with about 6. You can see the pipeline back there. It runs through that valley, and there was nothing else back there. There's some old mining equipment in that valley. It was pretty cool. And this place actually came with its own furniture too. That's kind of a big plus. You know, when you buy a place and it's already furnished. Yeah. Well, this is the place that we set up to live in while we built the place that we were building. This is our 2-man Eureka pup tent. And the cat lived on the roof. That's Mabel. And me and the dogs, we lived outside in the front yard. But the one thing that this property had, it had a lot of down timber. When they put the power line through this area, they cut a lot of these trees down. And once we looked through the pile of logs that we had, we found that we had enough material there to make about a 12 by 12 cabin, and then we'd be completely out of logs. So that's what we decided to do. You can see here Brooke is peeling a log. Right to the left there's a pile of logs, and we started off peeling and prepping our material. Here you can see that we've got a pretty good stack of logs already peeled up. We brought in some 1-by material to make our floor with. Now what we ended up doing is we built a 3-ply ring beam and then 2-by-8 joists and 2-by-8 ring beams. This is the face of somebody who is ready to get out of a tent. Now when you take a look at that beam around the edge, that's just 3 2-by-8s sandwiched up together and glued and nailed. And what you're doing is you're building something that will support the weight of a log wall. You don't really want to stack a 1,000-pound wall on a single rim joist. So we would build that exterior beam up 3 thicknesses of 2-by material, gluing it and nailing it, and then we'd hang the floor joists from the inside with joist hangers. If you look at that cement block, we were just anxious to get going, so we kind of propped this floor up with whatever we had. But what we ended up doing ultimately is we brought in some large concrete discs that a friend of mine had already poured. They were like 8 inches thick and about 2.5 feet across. They weighed probably 400 pounds. And we brought in, I think, 8 of them. And there was 1 mid-span and 1 on every corner. So this is the deck of the house. This would ultimately end up being the floor of the cabin. But right now we just used it for a deck. And it was nice to have someplace other than just the tent to be. We could sit up on the deck and we used it to grill. It was nice. Back to peeling logs. We bought 2 brand new draw knives that year, and we would use those draw knives on all kinds of stuff for years to come. And sometimes we would just spend the evening drawing knife and logs, trying to get our pile built up. That's the face of somebody who would rather be doing something else. You can see in this picture, there's our big red Homelight chainsaw. This is the saw that we used to do this entire cabin. I think it was probably from the 1970s. We're just getting started on the first 2 courses in this picture. Got to keep that thing sharp, and you want to make sure that your chainsaw is very good and dialed in for this kind of work. Because what you're actually doing is you're scribe fitting the logs together from the top to the bottom as you go. I'll explain more in a minute. Now, doing a full round 12 by 12 cabin, I would say that a 12-foot log is just about all anyone wants to handle. And you can see the corner post here. We started with a corner post on each corner, and we filled in the walls between the corner posts. There's another picture of that big, nasty red chainsaw. That's a Homelight Super XL, and that thing weighed, I don't know, it must have weighed 20 pounds anyway. That saw was given to us by our friend Neil Eklund. If you've ever seen Yukon River on the National Geographic program that Brooke and I were on, that's Neil's show. And Neil gave us that saw. The year previous, in 2000, Brooke worked for Neil on this log raft. And Neil was bringing in guests to float down the river as kind of a paying business. It'd be about 13 years later that we all got to go back out on the river and float the river for the National Geographic Channel. But as you can tell from that previous picture of a log raft, the log rafts Neil built were all pretty much along the same lines, and this is the one we built in 2014. What an amazing trip down the Yukon River. Beautiful, beautiful country. And there's just something pretty magical about floating a raft down a river. It's so hard to tell what you're going to do from one year to the next, but one thing I would like to do again in my life is spike together a nice log raft and float it down the river. And maybe build another cabin. Because building cabins is something like log rafting that just kind of gets into your blood. And this one is where I got started with the cabin building bug. And this is also another good picture where you can see that there's 4 corner posts to this cabin, and they went up first. If you look at the top of the frame, you can also see these skinny log poles that we use to keep the corner posts square. That log Brooks peeling is probably the biggest one that went in the whole cabin, although I can't remember exactly where it went. It was big. As we were building, we're also cleaning up the yard, stacking up anything that would be firewood for the winter, and just kind of tidying the place up. Every night for months on end, we would have a big bonfire out in our muddy yard and burn up brush. We'd burn up poles, burn up garbage left from whoever had the place before, and just tidy it up. And we had mud boots and a big fire and a nice radio and classic country. It was great. Here's a good picture of the actual process of building a log house like this. You put your log on, the next log in the course, and you tack it into the corner post, and then you tack it some way on the other end to hold it in place. And then you run the chainsaw bar between the 2 logs. What this does is this, it knocks off the high spots on the bottom log and the log above it. Then you take your saw out, you hammer that log down tight to the one below it, and you make another pass. Usually takes about 4 passes to make those logs up well. There's a good picture of the doorway. Doorways are great because you can use shorter logs and it really feels like you're making some headway. All these logs are screwed together with log screws, and they're like an 8-inch spring steel screw. They only have about 2 inches of thread on the end. There's another good picture where you can look above and see the poles that we use to keep the corner posts nice and square. Once we got a little higher on the wall, we took those off because they were no longer needed. You can see by this frame, we're actually getting close to the top. Just like screwing the top log to the log below it, putting a nice long toenail screw into each corner post was part of the job too. And once I got to the top, I used a chainsaw to score that top log just kind of eyeballing it. It didn't have to be perfect, but it had to be right in the ballpark. And I'd chalk a line all around the wall at the same height and score this top log. And then just take a hammer and knock out the chunks of wood to try to get a roughed in flat surface. Once there was a flat surface, we put down insulation and we nailed down a double top plate. Now the double top plate serves two purposes. It gives you a flat area to nail your roof rafters to, and it also ties the corners in. Not that it needed it in this building, because there's a million screws in it. You gotta watch this neighborhood, you know, so that I kept my guard dog right next to all our building materials. And you can see she's doing a great job. All those rafters are cut the exact same size. From one side to the next, they're all the same. Now what you're looking at here is, this is a log purlin. I put a purlin on each side, and then I put a big one right up the middle. So once the ceiling was done, these log purlins were exposed. They're really not doing anything functionally. They're just basically there for looks. In this frame, I'm notching out the center purlin, which would be the ridge beam kind of. If you looked right up at the peak of the ceiling, this is the log that you would see. And it kind of gives the illusion inside that the roof is held up by logs, but it's not. It's a rafter roof, and the logs were just there for looks. You can see I'm notching this log in order that it will fit into the last rafter, and then I can just screw it all into place and it just stay there. Here we are in this picture, getting the roof together, just standing up the rafters. Now with a rafter roof, I've done lots of rafter roofs, and they do go fast. Once your rafters are all cut, you can just throw them right up. They're nice and quick. Now I've probably got a half a dozen or more different settings where I'm cutting rafter tails, but this was my first. Being that my first cabin that we built, this is my first show chopping rafter tails. What this roof ended up being was a 9.5/12 pitch. The reason it was a 9.5/12 pitch is because I wanted to use just standard sheet metal for the roof that I didn't have to cut to length. I think these were 10-foot pieces of roofing material, so it just worked out that it was a 9.5/12 pitch roof. And a little too steep to stand on. You can see those kicker boards there. But we ended up getting that roof all sheeted in. And now came the tricky part. Putting the metal on. Because with the metal, you don't have any kicker boards to stand on. This is kind of an ominous picture for me, because right after this was taken, I fell off this roof. I fell off this roof to the east side of the building and landed in about a foot of nice, thick, cushy moss. I was laid down completely flat. I almost hit Brooke in the process because she was standing below, and I bounced. I literally bounced 6 inches off the ground once I hit the ground, and I didn't get a scratch out of it. But it ruined my day, so I decided to spend the rest of the day digging an outhouse hole and working on the deck. I didn't want back on the roof anytime soon. So me and Millie, we just put in the rest of the day doing other things that didn't have to do with roofing. But eventually, I got the nerve to get back on the roof again. And of course, this time you can see I'm up there with a rope. And we got the roof on. Now you can look at the deck here. You can see that it's held up just by 2x4s nailed into. We also built that deck around that spruce tree, which I always loved that. It was kind of a nice touch. And there's what the cabin looks like, pretty much finished. I really loved living there. It was like living in a tree house. In this frame, you can see that along the front of the property, where all those downed timbers were, we've got it cleaned up, and Brooke even has some planters. Using the same big cookies and posts, we put posts under the deck, and then we used some new used cedar shake shingles and covered in the gable ends of the cabin. I think those shingles really set the place off. At that point, we were ready to go inside. Now inside we laid down a 12 by 12 piece of linoleum, because that was the entire floor space. Poured a little bit of concrete with some stones out of the driveway, and set up our little fireplace hearth. A couple pieces of cement board for the backers right there to keep the wall from getting too hot. And in this frame you can see we took the chimney and we routed it 90 degrees out through the wall. That way we didn't have to put it up through the loft and ruin any usable space in the cabin. You can see it's a really good place to just hang out in your favorite chair with your 80-pound lapdog and enjoy the fire. We also put up some shelves for magazines and books and knickknacks and stuff like that. Not much room in a cabin. Shelves are important. Now, the windows we used in this cabin, almost every one of them came from the dump or they were used. Windows are either broken or they're not broken, so we recycled windows to make this cabin. Also, if you look at the wall, one of the beautiful things about a log cabin is that you can put a nail anywhere and hang anything you want in any place you'd like. All those pots are just hanging on the wall with 16-penny nails. Not only did we use recycled materials for the windows, but also this countertop is a recycled countertop. And as opposed to going to Home Depot and buying cheap junk cabinets, we decided we'd just build our own cheap junk cabinets. These are just 1/2-inch plywood. We had a little tiny rack there that we used for drying dishes. Underneath that sink, which that sink is a used sink too, we just had a 5-gallon bucket for wash water. And once we'd wash dishes, we'd take the 5-gallon bucket outside and dump it. Pretty efficient system. There's another one of our beautiful handmade cabinets. Just having a few places to store stuff in a cabin like this is pretty important. We used some caribou bone antler handles for the door pulls. Now, the problem with a cabin this size is where do you put the Christmas tree, right? I think in this situation, the best place to put the Christmas tree was out in the driveway because there's just no room in a place that small. But we lived in that cabin, just the two of us, for 2 years, winter and summer, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful little experience to have a little tiny place like that. And then it was the 3 of us, and it was probably a little small for 3 people. And of all the places we've had over the years, I think it was kind of hard to do better than that cabin. You could leave and let the place freeze up. It had no plumbing. It was a very simple way to live. And we had a lot of great times there. And the only thing that moved us out of that cabin was just space. Once Belle was born, our daughter, and there was 3 of us in there, it was just a little on the claustrophobic side. But for 2 people, it would be great. We ended up building this cabin in the summer of 2003, and we moved into it on Christmas Eve. And although the places we ended up with over the years got bigger and nicer and more amenities, there's always going to be a special place in my heart for our first cabin, our 12 by 12 cabin that we lived in for 2.5 years. It was a simple way of life and hard to improve on. Thank you guys for watching.